Good afternoon and welcome to the Immunology Graduate Program Information webinar. My name is Jen Gomerman. I'm a professor in the Department of Immunology and I'm also the Associate Chair of Graduate Studies. And beside me is Kourosh Kianazad, who is the Research Program Officer for the Department of Immunology and is the Administrator for the Applied Immunology Program. And not here, but in the background is Kate Sador, who is our graduate assistant, and she will be speaking out your questions on the chat room if you have any. So make sure you post your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them as we go along. So, as I've mentioned, this is who I am, and why would you want to do graduate work with the University of Toronto Department of Immunology? Well, we are a citywide academic unit, and we have training programs at all levels, undergraduate, graduate, and postdoctoral. I'm going to tell you about some of the individual graduate programs as I go along. And really what we are, the reason to come to immunology at U of T is that we are a research powerhouse. We're the leading program in immunology in Canada, and we produce high-level publications every year from a multitude of labs that are from across the research campus and hospital institute network. So we have a broad focus because of our numbers. We can study a number of different topics. Of course, we study cellular and molecular immunology. We have a number of labs devoted to the development of the immune system. We have huge strengths in the area of autoimmunity, and that includes various autoimmune diseases such as lupus, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis. We study primary immunodeficiencies, cancer, infectious disease with particular expertise in flu and in HIV/AIDS. We have a very big emerging theme in mucosal immunology, as well as studying the microbiome by virtue of a huge investment in infrastructure, including a germ-free facility at the University of Toronto. And we have a number of PIs who work in transplantation and immune tolerance. We are a large department, one of the largest, in fact, in North America for immunology, with 57 faculty members. And as I alluded to before, we're not just here on campus, but we're also in the Toronto area hospital network, including Sick Kids, Mount Sinai, St. Mike's, Sunnybrook, University Health Network, and we also have PIs at U of T Scarborough. So I said we are a research powerhouse. I didn't lie. We have over 2,000 publications in the past 10 years with over 37,000 citations. And we have a very healthy and broad operating grant base of over $20 million per year. I already mentioned we have significant infrastructure to study the microbiome, among other topics, as well as a very large community of graduate students, 115 graduate students currently enrolled in the immunology program, as well as over 220 postdoctoral fellows. So I say we're a research powerhouse, and here's some proof. We can take credit for a number of very important discoveries in the field of immunology. It was here in Toronto, in the lab of TACMAC, that the T-cell receptor was first identified. In addition, this is where stem cells were first discovered in the Immunology Toronto community. We have, in addition, evidence of gene discovery, including genes for Crohn's disease, CTLA4, which is an important immune regulatory function molecule. We've really been pioneers in the field of understanding how adipose or fat tissue houses regulatory cells that can have an impact on autoimmune disease. We have strengths in the area of signal transduction with characterization of the first tyrosine phosphatase, SHP1, and isolation of primary immunodeficiency genes, mechanisms of T-cell co-stimulation. So this has been a big area of research in our department for a long time, as well as a significant depth of knowledge in terms of how T-cells are selected in the thymus, how an independent intestinal immune system works. This has been pioneering work here in our department at U of T, as well as therapeutic advances in terms of how to use interferons to treat emerging infectious diseases, and how to make T cells in vitro so that we can cure immunodeficiencies, potentially cure immunodeficiencies. We have a very vibrant graduate student community. I think this is a really big reason to consider our department for graduate studies. If you come to our department, you will immediately be part of a community of students who are always organizing social events amongst themselves, but also opportunities to do community outreach, which are things that students want to do in order to gain a greater breadth to their expertise and experiences while they're here at U of T. They do a lot of fundraising for charitable purposes, and they do sports. And I can tell you this because I'm actually on the softball team myself, although we didn't win the final game. Okay, so the meat of this is really to explain to you what our graduate programs look like, and you have a few options to consider in immunology. So recently, we, up until the last year, we had only one field of study, which was fundamental immunology. And fundamental immunology houses our thesis-based master's and our thesis-based PhD. So if you were to do a degree in fundamental immunology, you can come in directly as a master's student, or you can, if you are sufficiently qualified, you can also come in directly as a PhD student, or if you have a master's prior to applying to our program, you would also come in as a PhD student. And those two degrees require a thesis and a defense of the thesis in order to graduate. We recently also implemented a new field of study called Applied Immunology, and the Applied Immunology field is a coursework-based master's that does not require a thesis. This Applied Immunology field only houses a master's program, and we're going to talk more about both fields and the differences between them as we go along. So I'm going to start by talking about the fundamental immunology field of study, and then I'm going to pass it over to Karosh, who's going to talk about the applied immunology field of study. So the purpose of the fundamental immunology field of study is really to provide advanced training and specialization where you would come into a lab, you would develop your own project, you would create original scientific research from that project, and then you would write it up into a thesis and defend that thesis at a final oral exam. To be admissible to the program, the fundamental immunology field, you need to have a 4-year bachelor's degree in a medical sciences field, and there's some listed here, or an equivalent. We're interested in students who also come from diverse backgrounds, so if you think that you may not fit this bill, you can always contact us and we can give you some advice. You need to have at least a B+ average in your final 2 years of undergraduate study. And we have 2 admissions meetings, one after the early deadline and one after the final deadline of admissions. This year, our early deadline of admissions is January 15th. So if you're interested in really getting a head start and securing a spot in our program, then I highly encourage you to apply for the early deadline for January 15th. This tells us that you're truly interested in the program and you really want to secure a spot. And the admissions committee will meet to discuss these applicants sometime in February. Our date is not at this point set. If you are not applying for that early deadline, and you can still apply for a final deadline, which is in May 20th, 2016. And if there are spots remaining in the program, then you would be considered for those spots after the final deadline. And you would probably get word. Our committee meets obviously after May 20th, so we hope to get word out to students in early to mid-June as to their status in the program. So, do we have any questions?
Yes, Jen, we do have one question about applications. How many applications per year approximately does the department receive, and how many are accepted?
So that really varies from year to year, obviously. We can get upwards, I believe, over 100 applications per year into our program. In terms of how many people we take into the program, that depends on how many supervisors are able to accommodate students for that year. So we don't take more students than we can fit into the program. That said, this works a little differently than some other departments and some other programs elsewhere in Canada, where you kind of have to get a supervisor to commit to you first and then you apply. That's not the way it works in immunology. We really just want to accept the best of the best, and then we help you to find a matching lab, either 3 rotation labs that you would then select from, or even perhaps you already have decided of a particular lab that you want to join directly. So either of those cases. So in general, I would say we have been, in the last few years, we take approximately 20 students into our program, and that's divided between the fundamental and applied fields of study, 20 to 25. Okay, so PhD is the same principle as the master's, but more. So here again, you are doing original research that would then be formulated into a thesis document, and then you would defend that in an final oral exam. And a typical thesis document would be 2 full, complete bodies of work, sometimes 3, but the minimum is 2. Hopefully, one of those or 2 of those are published at the time of defending your PhD, but that's not a requirement. They must be publication quality work, however. So if you want to go right into the PhD from your BSc, the same requirements for admission apply. So you need to have, but the grade point average has to be a little bit higher. So instead of a B+ average in the last 2 years, we're expecting an A- average to come right into the PhD program from your undergraduate degree. If you're coming with an MSc already, then it's a B+ average in the last 2 years. And the admission dates for the PhD stream of our Fundamental Immunology Program are the same as for the MSc. You simply have to indicate on your application if you want to be considered for direct entry. And sometimes we look at applicants who we admit into our MSc program and we ask the students, you've got a really great average, maybe you want to consider going directly into the PhD. So you might get approached by us with that suggestion. Okay, so in terms of the degree itself and how it plays out, for the MSc, we students, I already mentioned, they may want to select among supervisors, and we have what we call a rotation period, where a student can select, they need to do 3 rotations in 3 different labs with 3 different supervisors. And so that takes place in September, October, and November. And those 3 supervisors need to be sorted out in the summer before the student arrives at the program, when the program starts in September. And the rotation is a great idea if you're new to the department and you don't know who the different faculty members are. So what would be expected of you is that you would look at our faculty and who's recruiting students and look at their research profiles and decide on 3 potential supervisors that would be interested in hosting you. And then you contact these supervisors and ask them if they would be interested in hosting you for a 1-month rotation period. After that rotation period, in the 4th month, in the month of December, you need to choose a supervisor, and that's sort of a match type situation where the lab is also looking at you to see if you're a good fit, and you would then select a lab in December. Occasionally, if a match is not achieved, we have to do a 4th rotation, but for the vast majority of cases, the supervisor selection occurs in December, and that typically works out quite nicely. And then you begin your project in the host lab, and somewhere in that first, between months 4 and month 9, you're going to have your first committee meeting. So the committee is composed of your supervisor and 2 other faculty members who have expertise in the area of your project. So you're going to think about your project, and you're going to form a committee, and you're going to have that first meeting sometime in the early winter to spring period. And then shortly thereafter, around fall of the following year, you're going to have a second committee meeting to really make sure everything's on track. And if you're writing up a master's, that would be a time to decide what is going to be the shape of your master's thesis. And then we really hope to have students complete their master's within 2 years, but that's not a hard finish. So, the average is actually a bit higher. But the thesis is then submitted to the supervisory committee, hopefully towards the end of the second year. Someone coming into our department who already knows who they want to work with are not obliged to do the rotation period. So they can start directly in their chosen lab in September and then move forward from there. For the PhD, it's basically the same schedule for the first 15 months. You have the first committee meeting, the second committee meeting, you also do the rotation period, etc. However, instead of writing up your thesis in the towards the end of the second year, instead what you're doing is writing up a proposal, which is a very different kind of document. It's a document that says, this is what I'm going to do for the remainder of my PhD, and you outline what your experimental aims are and what your hypothesis is in a 15-page document. Hopefully, you've also maybe generated some preliminary data to support your proposal. And then you defend that proposal in front of an examination committee, and then the examination committee determines whether you're suitable for the PhD program or not. This is called a qualifying exam or a reclassification exam if you don't already have a master's degree, but it's the same thing. And if you pass that exam, then you are admitted into the PhD, formally admitted into the PhD program, and you continue your studies until you're finished, having regular committee meetings as you go along. So I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Kianizad, who's going to tell you about the Applied Immunology Program. If you have some questions for me, don't worry. There's going to be a period of question and answer at the end. I'd also like to take the opportunity to let you know that we're going to have an actual open house where you can meet us in person on October 27th at 3 p.m. here in the Medical Sciences Building. The room hasn't been posted yet, but it will be on our website. And we would encourage you to look into that. There is an Eventbrite kind of thing, so you can register ahead so we get an idea of how many people to expect. In particular, because after the orientation, the Immunology Graduate Student Association is going to host a pub night. I highly encourage you go to that pub night, because that's where you get the real information from our from our graduate students, and they can tell you what graduate studies in our department is like. So over to Kurosh.
Thank you, Jen. So once again, my name is Kurosh Kianizad. I'm the Applied Immunology Program Administrator. And this is a program that was recently launched early this year, and it's a new field that the department is offering. Now, what is this program about? It was born out of the strategic plan that the department undertook a couple of years ago, and we surveyed our students and said, what do you want out of our graduate program? And one of the things that we heard was our students wanted a graduate program that was a little bit more aligned to what the biomedical employers out in the workforce are looking for. So we decided to craft a graduate program with a focus in mind of giving students an ability to do the kind of reports and studies that would happen in biomedical research, and also give them more flexibility to take different courses and different varying amounts of courses that would fit with their desires and interests and passions in terms of biomedical research. So how is this different than the Fundamental Immunology Program that you just heard about from Dr. Gomerman? It's different in a couple of ways. One, it's not necessarily hypothesis-driven. The focus of the program is to apply technical knowledge to solve problems and create efficiencies in the lab that you're going to be working with. So, for example, you might have a project that you'll have to optimize an assay that the lab is trying to develop, make it work better, make it work faster. You might have to take an assay or a model that exists in another lab and adapt it to the lab that you're working in right now. You might be working with a graduate student to help them optimize their studies for their work as well. So essentially, the goal is to get you to hone the skills that modern biotech companies are looking for, and we hope to do this by getting you guys to do projects that you'll most likely be seeing when, if and when you decide to go for a career in biotech. So how long is this program? Unlike the fundamental master's program, the applied master's program is fixed in length. So the program is no more than 24 months long, and about 20 months of it you're going to be in a lab-based course and taking courses as a graduate student. If you have completed certain undergraduate immunology courses here at the University of Toronto, and you can see them listed on your screen, you can gain advanced standing into our program, and that means that you can complete the program in 16 months versus the 20 to 24 months that would normally take you to complete the program. And here's a quick outline of what your studies will look like. As I mentioned, we have a standard enrollment period and an advanced standing period. Students coming in and as a standard enrollment student, they will complete in their first year, in the fall and winter of their first year, 4 courses, 2 of which are mandatory. And those are a lab course and a thesis-based, not a thesis-based course, but a research project course. The other 2 that you'll take are fundamental and core immunology courses offered by the department. In the summer of your year 1, you'll continue your research studies in IM 1550, which is a summer project course, and that's the point at which the advanced standing students enter into our program. Year 2 is identical for both the advanced standing and standard entry students, whereby you have a choice of 3 of the following courses listed on the screen, as well as other graduate courses that are offered by other departments, if you get it approved by us. But these courses listed on your screen are pre-approved, so you don't need any other forms or anything else to sign. You just sign up and take them. And they're a wide variety of courses. They're courses in flow cytometry, histology, biostatistics, bioinformatics, varying amounts of fields that are in there. And again, this is geared towards the student picking the courses and the fields that they're interested in taking and are excited to learn about. In the final summer of the Applied Immunology Graduate Program, there is a graduate professional development module. That module actually happens throughout the winter of your second year, but that summer we hope to place students in internship programs or internship placements throughout companies located in the area. And throughout your studies in the Applied Immunology Program, you'll be working closely with our GPD director, Dr. Nana Lee, to help craft the appropriate path for you through the internship period. But that's what we aim to have students do in their second summer in the Applied Immunology Program. Now, the question is, do you get to work in a lab? And the answer is yes. Just because it's called a thesis or it's called a course-based master's doesn't mean you get to work in a lab. It just means that the lab is considered a course. And as I mentioned, the work that you'll be doing in a lab is varied, but it will be focused around you developing a new assay or technique to improve upon something that already exists in a lab. And it'll be your legacy and sort of what you leave behind in the lab, sort of the thing that you contributed to the research that's going to continue to go on within that lab. And the other major difference between the fundamental and the applied immunology program is that you do not have to produce a thesis in the applied immunology program. Throughout your studies, you'll be producing reports which will outline timelines for your research work in terms of what you're looking to do by what date, at what point will you make a decision to continue on the path that you've chosen, or whether you're going to deviate and enact plan B or C or D, depending on what's happening. And you'll also be making budgets. So at the beginning of the major research project, you'll propose a budget to say, I'm going to study these things, and it's going to cost me to do this much. And then throughout your studies, you'll keep track of that, and then we'll compare. Not harshly, but we just want to see how close you are to your budget, just to give you an idea of what the process of science is like. And again, this is these are all things that would happen in a biotech environment anyway, where you would be given a problem and you develop timelines and a budget and try to stick to that budget. So as I mentioned, the whole goal of this program is to help give you guys a taste of what it's like out there, and also to get you guys ready to be able to be very, very competitive candidates for positions that are available in the biotech sector. Now, what can you do with this degree? A ton. You could do a whole bunch of things. And here are just some examples. You could end up in business working as a market analyst or management consultant. You can end up in communications doing writing or science translation work. You could end up in government working as in the policy sector, or working as in the R&D or Office of Innovations for governmental agencies. You could certainly go and work in the biotech industry, either as a scientist or project manager. You can go into sales in pharma or biotech. You could end up in the educational sector by becoming a teacher or taking part in immunology or science outreach programs. You can work for nonprofit companies as well. And also what the program also lets you do is it's preparation for either an MD or PhD degree or a dental degree. Don't think that by completing this master's program you aren't precluded from continuing on in academics. You certainly can. What would happen is that you would complete your master's and then you would apply to enter the PhD stream, either here at U of T. We would love to keep you here at U of T, or if you go elsewhere. But you'd have to complete the master's first in its entirety and then apply to get into the PhD program afterwards. But as you can see, the world is your oyster after this program. Now, in terms of graduate funding, we have 2 levels of graduate funding, or 3 levels of graduate funding, and I think Dr. Gaman will take over this part.
Yeah, so that's right. And thanks, Karosh, for the overview of the applied program. So with respect to funding, these are the funding stipends. We offer a full stipend for the Fundamental Immunology Program. So that is $25,800.28 for incoming students. And once you finish that reclassification or qualification exam to become a fully fledged PhD student, then your stipend goes up a bit. Now, for the Master's in Applied Immunology, you receive a $5,000 stipend for the first summer. But I'd like to point out that the second summer with the internships, those are paid internships. So although you're not receiving a full stipend for this coursework-based master's, you will receive enough, so the $5,000 in the first summer, and if you choose to do an internship, you'll get a paid internship at the end. I should also mention that the internship is optional. Some students don't want to do an internship at the end of their degree, and that's why we have the time range for the applied immunology master's is 20 to 24 months, because if you didn't want to do the internship, you'd be finished in as early as 20 months. And if you qualify for advanced standing, then the length of your master's with the advanced standing would be 12 to 16 months. So you could finish in as early as 12 months if you chose not to do the internship. But we do hope that students will take advantage of the internships, and certainly Dr. Lee really helps students as they come into the program figure out where they want their internship to be, whether that's a local biotech, a not-for-profit, or something like that, to get you ready for an internship interview and then to place you. So that's the goal. So the deadlines for applying for the Applied Immunology Program are the same as the Fundamental Immunology Program. And again, we urge you to apply by this early date. If you need assistance with either the fundamental or applied programs, these are the contacts you have here. You're welcome to contact me. I would probably forward you along to Kate or to Karosh unless there's a particular question that they can't answer. And we're here to help. Our doors are open, and we really hope that you'll come out to the open house as well to meet us in person. So I think we'll do some Q&A, and hopefully you guys have questions for us.
Yep, I have a few here. Just some questions about admission requirements, I guess. So does the committee look more heavily at immunology courses than other unrelated courses when you're calculating GPA requirements?
It really helps to have an immunology course when you're applying to the fundamental program. That's something we want to see, because when you get into the program, you're going to be expected to do a graduate level course called Recent Advances in Immunology, where each week you're going to have a specialized topic by a guest lecturer, as well as a primary article from the literature that you're going to have to read and digest. That said, we do accept exceptional applicants who have never done any immunology, and we sometimes recommend that they do some remedial work before they join up in September. We have an online course in immunology that's going to be online within, I think, a few months. Mm-hmm. So what we are doing now is, since that's something you can take from home during the summer before you show up, then we may make the recommendation to students who don't have the appropriate immunology background to first take that course. And we may also make the recommendation on your admissions offer that you have to achieve a certain grade in that online course as well. In terms of how we weight the different courses, we would weight an immunology course more heavily than a film studies course. Not that we discourage you from taking film studies, but we want to see that you've done reasonably well in immunology. If you show a transcript where you've got Ds in immunology, then we would that would not work in your favor. So I think having good grades in immunology is obviously recommended.
I'll just add one quick thing. A link to the online course is found on our homepage in the center towards the middle of the page. You can find a link to it and get more information about when it's offered and how to take it.
Okay, so we have another question. What if I have a 5-year degree? Can I still apply?
Certainly. If you have a 5-year degree, we get applicants who, so the question is, if there was an applicant with a 5-year degree, would that help or hurt you? We take in applicants who have a 5-year degree if they can explain why, and often these are students who've done co-op periods, and we've certainly accepted students who have done that, and sometimes that's seen as a strength because it gives them some extra research experience before they apply. If you have a 5-year degree and it's because you had to stretch your degree out for personal reasons, let's say, that might be something you want to flesh out in your letter of intent, perhaps explain why you did your degree in 5 years, so that we can get some context.
Just a follow-up question to that. So the committee will look at the last 2 years of courses. Is that right? So if someone has done a 5-year degree, for example, do you look at 5th year and 4th year, or is it how many courses will you look at and how far back?
Well, it kind of depends. Like if you've done a 5th year, but you only took one course, then obviously we're going to look further back than just your 5th and 4th year. We need to get enough information to understand, whether you're competitive for this program or not. I should mention that with admissions, the B+ minimum is a minimum. And really it depends on the crop of applicants we get. And some years it's very competitive. So that's just what we're dealing with. So we focus our attentions on those last 2 years of your degree because we think they're the most relevant. But we are going to see your transcript for the your entire degree. So if you do have some marks in the first few years that are maybe a little stinky, then maybe call that out in your letter of intent and get in front of it and explain, maybe why you didn't do so well in a course and what you did to mitigate that for the future. And if we're seeing your transcript go up with time, that's also a really good sign that that you've improved over time. So don't let that stop you from applying.
Another question here. Do I need to have a project idea first before approaching professors?
I'll take that one too. So no, the answer is no. You don't have to have, in the same way that I mentioned earlier, that you don't have to have a professor picked out ahead of time, you also don't need to have a project organized ahead of time either. I would say that's kind of rare to have a student come in and say, I want to work on this project. We like to see people with an open mind, especially if they're going to do rotations. If you have a particular idea for a project and who you'd want to work with, and maybe you've even spoken to that PI in the past, you can articulate that in your letter of intent, but it's not necessary for applying. And the vast majority of people would not do that.
And the same would apply for the Applied Immunology Program. The projects, you don't have to come in with a project. Again, if you have one, phenomenal, but most students, again, don't come in with a project ready to go. You'll develop it as you speak to your supervisor when you get your lab situation sorted out.
Okay, thanks. Back to the grades for a minute. If a student has not yet finished 4th year and is applying, what grades do you look at? And can you talk a little bit about the process for students who have yet to complete their bachelor's?
So that's the norm. Most of the applications that we get are students who are currently in their 4th year, and so obviously they will not have had their 4th year grades completed. And so we have a mechanism for how we would look at that. We would simply look at the first term 4th year grades as well as the 3rd year grades, and that's what we look at. We don't ignore the 1st and 2nd year grades, let me make that clear, but we focus on the last 2 years. Occasionally we have a student or students who maybe their transcript is not as strong as we'd like, but they have other attributes to their application that are strong. Maybe they've had really excellent research experience. Maybe they have a publication. So those are students, if they've got really weak grades, we might ask them to above the minimum. But if they have some weak grades, we might give them an offer of admission contingent on seeing the grades at the end of the 4th year, because we want to make sure that this student's going to do well in the program. So that's one thing that can happen.
Okay, a question here about whether there's any weight put towards field experience, and would that have to be immunology based, or would other sciences be acceptable?
I just need to clarify, by field experience, do you mean your out catching fish and dissecting them, or do you mean wet lab research experience or dry lab? I'm not sure what the questioner is referring to, but if you're referring to simply research experience, wet or dry lab, that is very important for both programs. I would say it's more important for the fundamental program, because in the fundamental program, you're going to come into a lab and you're eventually going to produce a thesis. So we would like to see, we give strong preference to students who have a research experience. And if they don't, we are very hesitant to admit them to the department, because that really helps. But for the applied program.
For the applied program, we don't place as much of an emphasis on research experience, because we hope to give you that research experience as you complete the applied immunology program. But what we do look for are sort of the raw tools in terms of have you taken lab courses in your undergraduate studies? Have you, maybe you've done an undergraduate thesis, or some familiarity with what a lab, how a lab works and what happens in a lab, because you do need that sort of foundation to be able to succeed in the program. But by no means are we looking for extensive research experience, because the whole point of the program is to try to give you that research experience. And as long as you're enthusiastic and you've got the right sort of foundation for it, then you're considered a candidate.
And I should add that we do expect and maybe even hope for some of the applied immunology students who complete their degree, they may find that they want to do research in the fundamental program and come into the PhD program. So when they apply, they're actually going to be very competitive, because they'll have had 2 years of research experience at that point, and they'll be really technically competent. So if you don't have any research experience, I would probably steer you towards the applied field of study. And that also gives you a chance to feel it out and see what is research really like. So it's another plus to having the two fields.
Okay. Could you speak a little bit about what the committee looks for in terms of references? And a specific question is, how many of the 3 references need to be academic?
Okay, good question. So of the 3 references, if you have a research experience, we will be expecting that your research supervisor should provide a letter of reference. If your research supervisor has a huge, massive group and you never see that person, but you're working for maybe a research associate in the lab, then we would expect a reference from that person as well, or in lieu of the research supervisor. But the research supervisor, would be great to have one from them. So that's pretty important. In terms of the other 2 references, we find that references that come from course instructors are really of limited value, because if you're in a big course of 1,000 students and you get a course instructor to write a reference, usually that's not very useful information to us. They probably don't know you very well. Now, the exception being, there are some smaller courses where maybe a student has really interacted quite intensively with the course instructor. Maybe a lab course, that would be a good example. So that might be an example of another academic reference that you could think about. And then if you've worked in other capacities, maybe as a summer job, and you have a referee who could speak to your professionalism and to other aspects of your character, then that would be certainly considered as well. But we really do need for the fundamental program, we really do need an academic reference from your research environment.
For the applied program, similar requirements. If you've worked in a lab, ideally getting a reference from your supervisor or the person that you closely worked with would definitely be something we'd look for. And as well, the other 2 references could be people that can speak towards your work ethic and your ability to present yourself and handle yourself in various situations.
Any other questions from the webinar participants? Well, I would direct you to our website. We have all of the details that we've just presented on our website in very easy to access format. You have our contact information from this slide presentation. And again, the open house for our department is going to be on Friday, November 27th at 3 p.m. It will be approximately 1.5 hours long, followed by a pub night with our Graduate Student Association. And we really hope to see you there.
Thank you for joining.